Hello, I am Brandon's grandfather, and he has asked me to do this tape for him so he could present it to his school. I thought maybe I'd start off when I was about 5 years old, and at the time that I was 5 years old, I was we had lots of little friends around, and we all played together, and we enjoyed being together. And one of those things that little kids like to do, we always like to maybe get in a little mischief, but that helps with everybody. So this one day, we decided we'd go off in the woods, and it's just a short distance away, and we was going to play house. So it was in the pine trees and everything, so we got down to them, and we switched them out, and cleaned the floor out real good, and we went and had a little shop axe there. We went and cut some poles and surrounded it and made a little roof on it. So we really made a nice little place out of it. So we decided to cook. So when we decided to cook, well, we had to have some matches. So we went home, and I went and got some matches out of my mother's matchbox, and back down the hill, went over to where the little grove was, and so we put some water on a little pan there, and we had some of these pine needles all put together there. So we struck the match and put it in there, and we didn't realize that they'd just go up like they had powder on them. So boy, they started up real big, and first thing you know, why, the whole little house that we had was burning up. So we really got scared. So we run home, and you know what I did? I went and crawled under the bed so nobody knew where I was. So by that time, why, some of the grown-up people that saw the fire smoke coming from down there, so they went down and had some water in the creek right there, and so they put it out. So it didn't do too much damage, but that's what usually happens when little boys try to step out of line just a little bit. So there's lots of little things like that. So as I got on in for my 6th or 7th year, why, we went and moved from one house to another. We had quite a large farm down in the bottom that we were working for other people. And I was riding in the wagon, and we were going down, and my brother, he was driving the team of horses, and we started down a little hill, and I was sitting on the side of the wagon, and he didn't know it, and we hit a rock, and I almost bounced down under that wheel, and it just scared me to death. But that learned me right then, so when I sit in a wagon, I sit down in the bed. So it was something that we should all think about. So when I was about maybe 9 years old, why, my mother wanted to come to Texas. We were living in Arkansas at the time. My mother wanted to come to Texas, and she was going to bring me and my older sister with us. And that's the first time we had got to ride a train. So my dad, he had a car at that time, but he didn't care to drive it that far, so he took us over to Texarkana and put us on the train, and we were going to ride that train to Hubbard, Texas. So we got on the train, and while we were riding, why, gee, it was rough and bumpy. It's just like riding a bronc, but boy, we certainly enjoyed that. That was really something to ride a train. And when we got back, boy, that was really something that we hadn't intended on doing. On the way back, why, the train stopped, and we couldn't figure out what in the dickens was the matter. So there was an old cow trying to cross the tracks, and the train stopped. Instead of running over, well, the train stopped and went and shoot them off of the tracks. They won't do that this day and time, but the train went so slow then, why, it didn't really make any difference. They didn't have no certain time to be in a certain place. So it worked out real good. So by that time I was 9 years old, why, the Depression hit. And things were real hard. And we moved from Arkansas to Texas. We made our crop there in Arkansas that year, and what little money we had left over, we moved to Texas and rented a farm up there to settle down on, to try to make a home out of it. And it was quite a large farm. We had 8 horses to take care of, and we had about 10 or 15 head of cows. And me and my sister, we was always the ones to milk the cows. And my oldest brother, he would get up early in the morning and go feed the horses. My dad, he was always an early bird. He got up about 4 o'clock every morning, and he'd wake us up, and he'd say, "All right, boys, it's time to get up. We got to go to work today." And my mother, she'd jump up and go in the kitchen, and she'd fix a big breakfast. And the 2 or 3 of us boys would go out and harness up the mules after they'd been fed. And my sister and I would go out and milk the cows. And we'd come in, we had breakfast, and it was just breaking daylight. And we'd all go to the field. Sometimes it was so early that we didn't really have time to we didn't really have the lighting to really see what we were doing. But just a few minutes later, while the sun would start peeping up, then it'd be a beautiful day. We planted corn, and we had cotton, and we had some barley and stuff like that. You know, we could feed the cows and the horses both. Then we had some turkeys too. We had a little ranch of turkeys, about 50 of them, and we raised those turkeys so we'd have money to buy our school clothes with in the fall of the year. So when the fall of the year come around, why, Mother and Dad would take the turkeys to town, and they'd sell them, and then they'd buy us all our school clothes and everything out of what we got out of those. And that was one way that we had to really get by on a lot of the stuff. Of course, when we left there, we moved down to East Texas, which is about 100 miles away. It was down in the red sand down there. And we raised a lot of stuff on the farm down there. We had ribbon cane, we had peanuts, and we had corn, and we had just a little bit of everything. We raised a lot of watermelons and cantaloupes, and we just had a ball all summer down there, and we'd get our crops all cleaned out and everything. Why, we'd just have plenty of watermelons to eat, and we'd take a wagon load to the town and sell them. Of course, they wasn't worth very much. In Depression, you just couldn't hardly sell anything. We had sweet potatoes and stuff like that, and we'd take the peanuts and sweet potatoes and take them to the granary, and they'd have them chopped up together to feed the horses and the cows. And they'd just get so fat, they just didn't know what to do. And the cows give lots of good milk. And as kids, and I had a horse too at that time, and every Saturday, why, there's about 4 or 5 of us boys, we all had a horse, and I had a greyhound, and we'd all go rabbit hunting. And there was a lot of jackrabbits out there, and we chased these rabbits all over those farms, and we just really had a ball and enjoyed everywhere we went with them. And the horses, it seems like they looked forward to Saturday so they could get out and run. And when I was about a couple of years later on up the road, why, I was in junior high in school, and I really enjoyed it. I got to play on the ball team. I got to play on the boys' team, and my sister got to play on the girls' team. So we really enjoyed playing basketball. I was the center, and we really had a nice team, and we was the only school in the neighborhood that had a gym on the inside. And so we just really took the advantage of it. It was 2.5 miles to school, so we'd run, me and my sister would get out and we'd run to school every morning. And we'd play ball. We'd get there early, and we'd play ball, and we'd have recess, and we'd play ball, and we'd play ball at lunch. So we got to be real good players. And we had a real good team. The boys' team didn't make it quite to the state, but the girls did. And this little school that we went to, it wasn't very big. It was about 200 children going. But we really had a good time. We had a lot of good friends. We had a lot of good parties. And at the end of each year, before school was out, each class would put on a program. And the one would put on about an hour and a half play. And we'd all draw straws to see who could be in it. And ordinarily, we drew out because we was willing to go ahead and come up, and we had to come up after night. so we could practice for an hour or 2 hours at night for about 2 or 3 weeks before school was out. So we really enjoyed it, coming up there and being with the group that way, and the teachers were really good to us. And I remember one time in the spring of the year, just before school was out, it was almost April Fool. And when I and 2 more boys, we decided we wanted to go fishing. So instead of asking their parents or doing the teacher or anything like that, we just took off from school at noon and played hooky. So we had our fishing poles hid on the way up to school, so we went and got our fishing poles, and we went back and we went fishing that afternoon. And the next day when we came to school, the teacher let on just like nothing ever happened until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So he asked us boys to stay in after school. He wanted to talk to us. So after everyone left, he come in and he says, "Don't you boys think you deserve a punishment by hooking school yesterday afternoon?" And we told him yes, that we did. So we had a little board there. He bent us over and gave us all a little spanking. And I'd always been told when I went to school, if I got a paddling in school, I'd get another one when I got home, because I would reserve both of it. And I knew that too. But so when I got home, well, my dad, he'd found out about it, and he took me out behind the house, and he gave me he had one of these little quirts, and he gave me a few licks. It really didn't hurt too bad, but it was something to remember by it. And you know, after that, I respected that teacher more than ever, because I know that we had disgraded us in the way that we had done him. So we tried to make it up to him. So we were good students the rest of the time that I went to school. So a little bit later, when I was a little bit older there, it was up in the early 30s, about 1932. The Depression was on, and it was hard. People just didn't have any money then, because there just wasn't any money in circulation. So when the end of the year came, what little money we had left over, we had to save it so we could get through the winter without any problem. So it worked out real good. So the people at the farm that we were renting on, they had a lot of new ground down in the bottoms, and they wanted to clear it so they could make some farming land out of it. So he went and gave us $1 a day for each person. It would work 10 hours a day. Now that isn't very much, but it was a lot then. $1 a day for working all day, and we got an hour off for lunch. But we really enjoyed getting out and working, because at least we had a job to do. We had a job, and we took the advantage of it. So it worked out pretty good. And as another couple of years on up, I got to be in my teens, quite heavy, and 15, 16 years old. My sister, she's got married in the meantime and has lived about 10 to 15 miles from home. And her husband wanted me to come and work with him on a farm that he had over there and drive a tractor. So I agreed I'd come over and we'd buy the tractor together, and it was on his father's ranch. So I was to drive the tractor at night, and he was to drive it in the daytime, because they had one little girl at home then. And he felt like he should have the day shift. So that was all right with me. I wasn't doing anything anyway except working. So I worked my head off there for about 6 months. At the end of the year, when we got through and we made a payment on the tractor, I think I had $200 left over. So I set up for myself right then. I says, I'll never work on a farm again as long as I live. And I really haven't. Because when I left that farm, I went and joined the CCs. And when I joined the CCs, why, the kids in this day and time, they don't know what the CCs really was. It was a camp for young men that wanted a job, and the pay wasn't very big. It started out at $30 a month, but you got your boarding room and a nice place to stay. And it worked out real good. I spent 2 years in there, and I had 2 raises while I was there. And at the time, I was helping support my mother and dad with part of the money that I made while I was there. And it made me feel good about it. So everything worked out good. And in the meantime, why, I was I got married to your grandma. And my boss, he was a real swell guy, and I had been working for him for this almost all the time I was in the CCs. And he had learned me a good trade. He learned me to be an operating engineer. And I picked it up, and I made something out of it. So he took me to the state engineer of Arizona, and they gave me a real good job. So in the meantime, I got this good job with them, and I started working out on the Indian Reservation in Arizona. And our boss came by about once every 2 weeks, and he just laid out the work that he wanted me to do. He didn't have any problem getting it done. I knew just what he wanted. So it worked out real good. And in the meantime, why, your grandma and I got married, and we had a trailer house out there, and it worked out real good for us. So we just loved it out there. And there was 2 more families there with us. And every Saturday then, we'd all get in the car and we'd go out on the Indian Reservation and go rabbit hunting with our 22s. And it worked out real good, because people back in those days, why, a good young rabbit was good to eat. So we ate a lot of them. And we'd have pancake suppers out there. We did out on the reservation there. It was about 50 or 60 miles into Flagstaff. And on weekends, we didn't go into town no more than we had to, just to get groceries. And we just really enjoyed ourselves out there. Then when we moved into Fredonia, when my sweetheart moved into the hotel there in Fredonia, and it was just a little one-room apartment there, all we had. Didn't have a place big enough to cook or anything, so we ate in the hotel. We had all of our meals there. And I was working 10 hours a day then for the state, and every Sunday that I worked, they gave me a day off. And Iris, she would go up to Kanab and stay with her mother during the day and everything, and she enjoyed being up there, and she'd go up to school and visit her friends up there, and they enjoyed it, and it worked out real good. And I had my call to go into service about that time, and so I had to give up my job, and the guy that was working with me, they gave it to him. He was supposed to have the job to start with, but they gave it to me because I had been trained for a job like that, and they felt like they'd get it done for a good purpose. So Grandma and I, we got in the car. She had never met any of my people, so we got in the car and went to Texas to visit them. And we went down there, and we was gone for about 3 weeks. And we just had a ball while we were down there, and my people got to love her all as much as I did, almost. And we did. We just really had a good time. And while we were there, I got a reclassification back from the Army. I would be classified different, and I wouldn't have to go in for a while. So that was really nice. So we got in the car, and we came back to Kanab. And I went back to Arizona to visit some of the friends where I'd worked with, and they had given Bob my job. And I told Iris, I said, I can't take his job away from him. So we went to Henderson, Nevada to work. So we got down there. We took our trailer. We had a trailer in the meantime. And while we were down there, I got a job at the magnesium plant. And I worked there for about 4 months. And it started getting hot. It was terribly hot. And we had heard that they was going to build a steel plant in Provo, Utah. So we figured, well, we've never been to Provo, so why not? It's getting too hot here, so we gave up our job there, and we went back to Kanab in the meantime. And while we were pulling the trailer back to Kanab, before we got back to Kanab, we broke an axle on the trailer, so we got that fixed, and we got into Kanab, and there was snow on the ground, and it was cold. But it didn't stay long. We stayed there long enough to enjoy some of the friends around there. And then we got hooked up our trailer, and we took off for Provo. So when we got up to Provo, Iris had a sister. Her Aunt Irva was living there in Provo, so we went to their home first. And when we got there, they told us that we could put our trailer on their lot there at the back of the house. So we did, and we stayed there for about 2 or 3 weeks. And in the meantime, I had got a job with a little construction place. It was working on the airport. I was driving a truck, so things was working out pretty good then. But instead of building the steel plant right then in Provo, why, they had prolonged it. But it was going to start right away as quick as spring break. And about the time when spring break, why, we got a chance to go back to work out there. We had a chance to buy a little basement home there, so we took our trailer and traded it in on a down payment and moved into this basement home up by the BYU. And that was our first home we had, and we really enjoyed that. And it was just a little 3-room apartment in the basement. And of course we had to fix it up. It didn't have nothing in it except water, and I had to build some shelves here and shelves there and put stuff together. And we got it to where it was quite livable. So we lived there for, until about 6 months, and I was called to go into service. And when I was called to go into service, I had to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky, in the tank corps. I was selected to be a tank driver. So I taken my 13 weeks training there at Fort Knox. And I quite enjoyed driving the tanks, but I knew it was a dangerous job and everything. But there's nothing I could do about it. I went, well, I had to do the best thing I can, the best I could, and make the best grades I could. So I did, and about the time that we had our first basic training in, why, they gathered us all up and shipped us overseas. And we landed in Casablanca. And while we were in Casablanca, we were bivouacked about 5 miles out of town. And there was nobody around there except Frenchmen and Arabs, and we couldn't understand the French, and the Arabs were so filthy that we didn't want anything to do with them anyway. So we was only there for about 2 weeks. And I was called in front of the general there, and they said we have an opening for 3 people in the engineers, and you 3 people have experience of operating heavy equipment. And we agreed to him, and he said, well, I'd like for you guys to be into the 702nd Engineers, so you know how to handle the equipment that we'd be working with. So we agreed to accept the job until the war was over. So we were handling petroleum distribution, we were running pipelines, we were driving breaker trucks, we were laying, taking gasoline off of boats, and we were filling the tank farms with them, and we were pumping gasoline to the airfields, which we only had 56 airfields in Africa at that time, which was quite a few. We had some fighter fields and some big bomber fields. And the ones that we hated most was right up between where under the artillery in the front lines. We would be up under, and the artillery would be shooting over us. And of course we didn't like that very much, but at least they were protecting us while we were laying this pipeline up to where the fighter planes could be, wouldn't have to fly so far to go out in front for fighting. So we were doing our good deed. So as time went on, why, I moved 3 convoys from Casablanca to Bizerte, which is 2,700 miles, 3 different times. And was bringing up Army equipment each time. We had about 100 trucks to take care of on the way. So once we got everything all moved up there, why, the assembling was proceeded to make the invasion of Sicily. So in the meantime there, we were, each day while we were gathering around, and I was taking care of a big wrecker truck, getting stuff put together and lining it up, you know, and getting it ready to go on the boats. And every night while the Germans came over, and we knew who they were because we could tell the difference in the sounds of the motors. They was just different from ours, and there'd be so many lights go up around there, you'd think it was Christmas. There's floodlights going all over everywhere, and there was big guns going off here and there, and they were dropping their small bombs. But most of them were reconnaissance planes. They were just more or less trying to find out what was really going on. But some of these 20-millimeter shells that would shoot up, they would come back down, and they didn't explode. So this one night I was having so much artillery going up, I crawled in under the truck, and it was laying right there by the side of the hind wheels, and it had dual wheels on it. And one of those 20-millimeter shells came right down and lodged right between those wheels, but it didn't go off. So I guess the Lord was really looking after me. He took care of me. Then it's only been a couple of weeks after that why I was laying in my bunk about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we heard this crazy noise going on, and here come the Jerry aeroplanes, and they was separating just before they got to us, but they was just fixing to drop this incinerator bombs. And I got up out of my bunk and took a walk, and we walked down the road, just 2 or 3 of us, just to get away from where we were. And we came back, why, this piece of shrapnel had went right through my mosquito net, which I had stretched over my bunk, and it went right on through my sleeping bag right into the ground. It just burned a hole right through it. So that was another time that the Lord was protecting me for doing what I thought was right. So after that, why, it wasn't just a very few days, so we all got on the boat and we proceeded to go to Sicily, and we got over there, and by the time we all got there, we were bringing up the rear. Why, the Germans had moved out of Sicily and was on into Italy, moving up towards Rome. And just a few days, we sat right out in the harbor for a few days out there, and we didn't have enough extra water for showers or anything. So we'd drop a rope over the boat, over the side, and we'd climb this rope down, or else we'd jump down and swim out into the ocean right there, and then we'd climb this rope to get right back up. So that was the way we had our shower. But it was a good, nice, cool shower. The Mediterranean is so blue, you can see for miles and miles, and you can look down into the water, and you can just seem like there's just no bottom to it. So once we left there, we went over to Naples, and we left the boat there. And after we left there, well, we got on the trucks that we'd taken off the boat and everything, and we went up close to Rome, which is a little town called Foggia. It was quite a nice little town. We had several airfields there that had to be taken care of. So they distributed us out into about 12 people in each group, and we had what they call a little side camp of our own. And we had a cook, and we had a first sergeant. Then there was about 6 of us that done the work. We'd run these pumping stations, getting the gas into where the airfields were, and we had people filling the tanks on the planes and all of that. Then about 10 days we worked, and they'd give us an afternoon off. So we'd put on our best clothes we had, and we'd go down to Foggia and just walk the streets and visit down there between other soldiers, and do a little shopping and stuff like that. They didn't have much to shop for. And there's a couple of times there that we run out of food in there, so we jumped in the Jeep, and we had a lot of this old orange marmalade and stuff like that we didn't like. So we'd put 2 or 3 gallon cans of that in the back of the Jeep, and we'd take off for the mountains. And we get up there, and those Italians, they just loved that stuff. So we'd trade them that for potatoes and stuff like that they had. So we had lots of potatoes and chicken and stuff like that. So we ate pretty good as long as we could do that. So it wasn't very long after that until we moved up to another little town just out of Rome. And the fighting was going on all just outside of Rome up there at the meantime. And Rome was a barge city that there was no shooting into it or anything. So that was a place we could go for a recreation. So when we did have some time off, we'd go in and visit the old Roman empires and all that stuff that they had up there, and go into Vatican City. And during the meantime, we got to visit a lot of the different places out there that all of the other soldiers didn't get to do. But that's what we really liked. But just a little while later, then, the war was over. And once the war was over, we had to take up a lot of this pipeline that we had laid down. So they let us work just like we were civilians. We worked so many hours a day, and there wasn't no rush because the war was over, and we just work 8 or 9 hours a day and come into camp, and it's just like a hotel. It's just a place to stay and eat and stuff like that. And then on weekends, about every 2 or 3 weeks, they'd let us have a truck. 10 or 15 of us, we'd get in a truck and we'd go sightseeing. And while we were sightseeing, we'd go up to Mandalay, which is up on the border of Switzerland, and on through that way and around. And we'd come down, and they had